What I'm going to be showing you today is kind of my framework for writing. It's got 4 parts. It's not scientific. It's not based on deep educational research. It's very practical. I've done content work for radio stations. I've done content work for nonprofit organizations, for my own projects, and now in kind of a big company setting. And this is just some of the stuff that I teach other people when they ask for help with their writing. If you've read the abstract, I'm trying to make it really clear. This is not about better writing. This is not about more readable stuff. This is not about, writing the best prose in the world. I'm not going to share like the 4 tips about web copywriting that people ever share. Concise headlines, make it scannable, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be about writing better, making that process a little bit easier. I have a lot to go through, so I'm probably going to kind of fly, but if you hit something where you just have no idea what it was that I just said, please stop and interrupt. There'll be links for all of the apps. And some of the tools that I mentioned available through the slides in my website. And I think that's it. So we'll get going here. So who in the room, and you can raise your hand at home too if you want, but who in the room has writing explicitly as part of their job description? Like you produce content for public consumption. That's a lot of people. Awesome. So definitely going to be helpful for all of you. I'm also trying to help people that just have to write a lot for their job, if you're doing proposals or business emails, that kind of stuff. So the thing I found about writing is there's a lot more to writing than writing. People talk about, they say, I'm not a writer, or I've got writer's block, or I don't know how to put this blog post together. And when I hear people talk about this stuff, they're usually blaming some sort of lack of aptitude, or like there's just this innate skill that's missing. People talk about creativity like it's the weather, just that kind of ebbs and flows and changes around. And I don't buy that. I had a choir teacher who liked to tell people when he was recruiting that if you can talk, you can sing. Like if you can make melodic speech, you can sing. And so I like to tell people if you can think, you can write. If you can have thoughts and you know a language and you can type, you're now a writer. Click. Famous ad man David Ogilvy agrees. He says it even better. People who think well write well. People who woolly-minded people write woolly letters, woolly speeches, woolly memos. So clear thinking, clear writing. So when something's not right with our writing, when we're feeling stuck, when we're feeling friction, what's wrong, right? Did we just suddenly forget how to think? Are we dumber than we were yesterday? Some days, maybe. I hope not too much. If your check engine light comes on, most people don't think there's something wrong with them, right? They think there's something wrong with their car. So when there's something wrong with your writing process, when you're having difficulty writing, I don't want you to think there's something wrong with you. I want you to be thinking about outside yourself a little bit to your writing workflow. That little light is saying, paying attention to me. So what I want you to pay attention to is your workflow. Fancy way of saying it, tools and processes applied in series to accomplish your work. That idea of workflow is what gives this talk structure. And workflow is kind of on the strategic level. What I found is that a lot of people inherit their workflow. They come into a job and there's a certain way that content gets produced. And whatever apps are on the computer and whatever CMS system is there, that's just sort of the flow they get into to producing content. So imagine those are all the possible options. Workflows are a little fluid. You might complete one assignment by knocking it out that way. Maybe it's a shorter assignment and there's just a few steps to get it done. Maybe it's some huge thing and there's all these steps involved. So the big mistake, as I've said, with workflow is lack of awareness, not being sure where you are in that workflow. Now there's probably a lot of stuff that we do the same way each and every time. And those are really more processes, this rigid, predetermined set of tasks. And processes are a bit more tactical. So when I'm talking about tools today, I'm going to kind of mix all this stuff up, but processes can sort of be tools. And those processes are going to happen the same way each time. And the problem with processes a lot of times is that they're undocumented. People have this kind of strong sense of what they need to do next in something that they've done a lot. But a lot of times it's simply just not written down. They don't have a checklist, which just kind of boggles my mind. If there's something you're going to do every way, make the same way every time, make sure you're doing it consistently. And then when I'm talking about tools today, just anything that makes your work easier. So that could be an app, a technique, a process. People talk about hacks now in the sense of like life hacks, workflow hacks. Our goal is just about adding these tools to your toolbox. And metaphorically speaking, the problem I see that a lot of people have with their tools when it comes to their writing is not plugging them in, not giving them the full power, not opening up the preferences panel and seeing what that application can actually do for them, not reading the documentation and sort of seeing what options are available. I have a brand new chop saw in my garage that I got, I think, a year and a half ago, and I still haven't figured out how to get the blade attached. So I'm not cutting a lot of wood with that saw. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of people have with their writing tools. So let's build our toolbox. If you're taking notes on paper, this will be especially easy, but I encourage you to make a little room to take notes. And draw yourself a little grid. I make this in quadrants. You could just have kind of 4 sections, 4 buckets, whatever works for you. This is the framework we're going to be working with today. 4 parts of the writing workflow: thinking, composing, editing, and finishing. The line between thinking and composing and the line between editing and finishing is pretty fuzzy. That's something that you're going to be probably stepping back and forth pretty frequently. Where I see a strong weak spot in a lot of people's writing workflows is that middle line is also fuzzy. But that should really be a one-way trip. Think, write, think, compose, get your draft in a good shape, then get into that final flow of editing and finishing. So if you haven't already, draw this. We're going to start filling it in. So once you have your grid, I want you to start thinking about the tools that you already have in each one of these categories. How do you represent your thinking? Is it lists? Do you get a project brief? Do you have an assignment that comes in from an editor? What do you use while you're writing? Obvious to think about anything, right? Keyboards. Your keyboard is a tool that you use while you're writing. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of involved in your writing process. A lot of people probably use Microsoft Word. Yeah. Can't stand Word. Editing. How do you improve your writing and correct errors? What stuff do you use to get that done? For some people, it's just their eyeballs. They just look through the document, and that's their tool. So we're going to add some editing tools. And finally, finishing. How do you go from a finished draft to a finished assignment, which especially in the web publishing world can be either a huge gap or ideally, a very, very small one. All right. So we're going to start with thinking tools. Very simply, the thinking phase, the thinking step of your writing workflow, just having ideas, making plans, getting that stuff together. It's important during the thinking phase to be very descriptive and to gather a lot of stuff, but don't start trying to make decisions right away. That's where I see a lot of people go wrong. They're filtering as they're gathering. You can't really do both at the same time. So different types of thinking: you might be capturing ideas, you might be generating ideas like brainstorming, trying to describe a system that already exists, or maybe doing some discovery process. So when you're in the thinking phase, you really want to value quantity. Gather as many ideas as you can, ideally as quickly as you can. Because the problem that a lot of people come to me with is starting with a blank page. They're trying to write something, and they're staring this down. I try to avoid ever having this. For my writing workflow, I want to be able to go from this to at least some sort of skeleton, having a starter paragraph to dump in, but something to work with. Because this is actually really scary. This is what a lot of people talk about with writer's block. They wake up in the morning or they sit down to do their assignment after lunch, or like the 10 minutes in between meetings where they actually get to do writing work. And they're staring at this blank page and they don't know how to get it done. So I think we can be a little smarter. Any fans of Sherlock? Yeah, love that show. Get a little distracted at this slide. Stupid, sexy Sherlock. Great Sherlock Holmes quote: "Data, data, data. He can't make bricks without clay." He's trying to solve a mystery. We're kind of trying to solve a mystery too, to put this thing together that doesn't yet exist. But I see this all the time. People trying to write things without data. People trying to make bricks, these finished pieces, without clay, without the inputs. And what's really weird to me, particularly in a web context, is most people wouldn't dream of approaching the design process this way. Right? We know as designers we're not just going to sit down and pop open Photoshop and just start going. Right? We have to have inputs. So when you see the little tool icon, something you could conceivably write down and look up more later. For every one of these tools I mentioned, there's probably like 15 that do the same thing that I don't. Some of them are conceptual, some of them are just really literal. If anyone's read Getting Things Done by David Allen, or has kind of fallen into that world, he has a great concept called ubiquitous capture. And it's this idea that nearly every thought that comes into your head goes somewhere. If you're in the middle of a writing assignment and you remember that you need to get milk after work, you write that down. You capture it immediately. You get it out of the way. Field Notes brand notebooks, I really like that quote. I'm not writing it down to remember it later. I'm writing it down to remember it now. This idea of capturing stuff as soon as it happens and giving yourself more resources and material to work with later on. Big fan of the work of Merlin Mann. He does a lot of podcasting and blogging and does a lot of productivity talking. His ubiquitous capture tool is the Hipster PDA, which he describes as gathering note cards, getting a binder clip, and then there's no step 3. Carry it around. You don't need the perfect app. You don't need some incredible, amazing system for tracking all of your stuff. Just write some things down as they occur to you on index cards. Keep them with you throughout the day. My ubiquitous capture tool is a little more digital. I use an app on iOS called Drafts. There are similar tools for other platforms as well. What's neat about Drafts is you can, if you see in their logo, right, ideas and then all of these little destinations and outputs, you can configure all of these ways to sort of route the stuff that you're dropping into this application. So for this conference, I made a little action for PSU Web, and if I tap an icon, I'm immediately given a text entry screen. I type a little thought, I hit send, and it now syncs to a text file that has all of my thoughts about the conference. I don't have to worry about routing it. I'm not emailing stuff to myself and losing it later. It's exactly where I want it, exactly where I want it. And it can sync over Dropbox, and so I took these screenshots within seconds of each other. So now that's on my desktop computer. I've got a application open for reading text files, and my information is there. Evernote is really great for capture as well. If you use it on the desktop, I highly encourage you to check it out on mobile. They have a lot of kind of topic-specific apps that help you capture certain things. One thing that not everyone knows is if you capture something with the mobile device, it adds data from your calendar appointments in, which is kind of cool. So you can, you already have some of that context built in. Slightly different tack here is this idea of a work journal. So this is something I do just to kind of stay sane. I work on a team of about 13 or 14 within our UX department. And then even across the company, I'm kind of known as like the writer, which is scary because there's like 500 people at the company. But I'm the writer. And so I've got IMs and phone calls, and when I was in the office, it was even worse, people popping by the desk and just all of this stuff kind of flying at me. So I got in the habit of just writing down, even if it was a really curt, quick thing, just stuff that happened. Right? Went to this status meeting, published a new draft, dropped little links in there. Even if you talk with someone in the hallway, you have a little water cooler conversation. And writing all that stuff down has saved my butt so many times when it comes like, oh my gosh, like somebody needs this yesterday. I didn't realize that. Maybe one slipped through the cracks. Well, now I've got all my links collected, all the conversations I've had about it. I can kind of give myself like a little 5 or 10 minute warm up and get back into the information I need to publish it. Day One is a really nice tool for that. What's on the screen now, they have a little menu bar applet. And with a quick key command, I've got a little entry area open, paste stuff in, hit save, it's now timestamped. So it's really popular with like lawyers, right, who want to like track every minute, every phone call they've ever had. But I think it really works well in a professional context as well. All right, and I am keeping a pretty good pace here, so if there's any of these tools you want to know more about, feel free to just pop a hand up and we can chat about them. Sure.
I'm curious about this one. Do you review like your journal in certain time periods, and I mean, how has it saved you?
Sure. So I do. We send weekly progress reports as part of our team, which I think is kind of another nice tool if you don't do that already. And they're pretty quick, you know, just here's some of the stuff I worked on, here's the people I worked on it with. So that's kind of forced me to be in the habit of reviewing this periodically. But I also will use it for search. You know, I'm sure we all have perfect project management processes and stuff never stalls out, you know, never just kind of mysteriously falls off the radar only to rear its head again months later. That never happens, right? But if it did, you could pop up your work journal, do a quick search, you know, or even just kind of, okay, the meeting was on this day, what else was I doing that day? And it lets you do a little bit of detective work to kind of pull that stuff together. And that's a pretty common recommendation. Dale Carnegie, David Allen's approach, they all recommend this idea of sort of the weekly review, of just looking at all the stuff you did, evaluating your own performance. If you need to generate some ideas, or if you're working maybe more on personal projects or more creative projects, there's this nice idea of called a Spark file. A guy named Alex Hillman, who runs Indie Hall in Philadelphia, helped popularize this because he talked about defragging your brain with a Spark file. And the idea is, so maybe you've got these little notions, like just these little snippets. Like for me, sometimes I just have a good line, like something that just pops into my head and just like sounds kind of cool. I don't know if it's a song lyric. I don't even write songs, but I keep song lyrics that pop into my head. But also little bits, little ideas, little nuggets of stuff related to work and projects that I'm on. And what you do is you store it chronologically. So just from the beginning of time till now. And the trick with the Spark file is that periodically, once a month, every 3 months, you literally read the entire thing. And if you go back and if you do that process for even just a couple of months and go back and read sort of like every little stray thought that you've had, every little creative instinct and notion that's occurred to you, like you'll start to see these puzzle pieces come together that you had no idea is what your brain was working on at the time. And it can be really fun. So when I've got to come up with a lot of ideas fast, maybe I'm trying to outline a new talk, I didn't know what else to call this, so I called it a card jam. I love index cards. My office is covered in them. And I'll get a stack of index cards and a pen, and I will write one thing on one index card on the top. And I flip it over, and then I write another thing on another index card, which might sound silly and simple, and it is silly and simple, but it's a little bit different than staring down that big, open Microsoft Word document with nothing in it. I've now kind of allowed myself one idea at a time, pip, pip, pip. And the other nice thing about it is it lets you start to shuffle stuff. It's an analogy I like to use if you think of your brain as a bingo spinner, right? Just stuff's just tumbling and churning. Well, you can only pull out one ball at a time, right? You're never going to get to your bingo unless you pull out the first ball. So get that first idea out. If it's crappy or bad or whatever, I usually end up at the end of a project, there's a pile of just crumpled note cards next to my desk. But there's a lot of good stuff on there too. And you can just kind of shuffle and play and group with those cards and have a little fun. I use this one because, well, I'm sure we all have perfect marketing plans and everything, you know, just gels together really nicely, and we already know what the marketing message of all our initiatives are before we start them. Sometimes you have to work it backwards a little bit. If you find yourself in that instance, I didn't even take any rhetoric classes. I have like a Wikipedia level understanding of persuasive communication, but I found it useful in working with stakeholders to sort of map out the possibilities of how we might pitch something and just making it sort of visible on the map. Here are some logical reasons that people might like this thing. Here are some emotional reasons that people might like this thing. As large institutions and old companies are fond of. Here are some reputation-based reasons that people might like this because we're so old and established and have so many alumni and what have you. So kind of laying that out gives you, you know, a nice quick list to compare those messages against. Sketching can be really useful. I'm always surprised at how few writers, you know, like don't use pen and paper. I always have pen and paper at my desk. I'm not an artist, as you might be able to see from this. I was capturing some sketch notes from a talk. But giving stuff a little bit of visual shape kind of helps me think more in web terms. It helps me sort of maybe visualize the flow of ideas, maybe a page template of what my information is eventually going to go into. I also find it really useful during meetings. We have project managers, and they do an excellent job of capturing all the stuff that's said and all of the to-dos. But sometimes, like, just kind of like the essence, like the je ne sais quoi of the meeting is not quite there. And if it's weeks or months later when I'm coming back to something, and I don't have anything else to reference but sort of a transcript of the meeting, it can be tough. So sketching, I think, can help with that quite a bit. I thought I'd mention free writing, just because this is the technique that most people seem to have in their tool belt already, which is just like sitting down and writing for an extended period of time. I don't do much free writing because I'm not very disciplined. If you're going to do free writing the right way, you set a timer, 5, 10, 15 minutes probably at the most, and you pretend that your delete key does not exist. You just type, 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 and you want to hear that tip-a-tap the whole time. There shouldn't be these big, there should not be the sound of you getting out of your chair and going to get coffee. You just need to sit 5, 10, 15 minutes and write consecutively, and then work from that. I really like mind mapping. Does anyone make mind maps for their projects? Okay, I'm scared at how few hands there are. Try mind mapping. It's really fun. It's easy. You can do it with paper. There are a lot of digital tools. But mind mapping is a free-form diagram of what's in your head, of your thoughts on a thing. And it kind of builds like a tree where you would have one sort of concept at the root, at the ground level, and then whatever occurs to you as being related to that is what you write down next. And if something's related to that concept, you add that one in. And you just kind of keep branching out as far as you want to. This is how I do all of my talks and presentation work, any stuff that's going to end up linear, because I can kind of shuffle that map around and start to build an outline. What's really fun about it is if you do it right, I can actually take this like 99% of the way to a complete draft, because I can keep revising it. I make the thoughts a little more clear. I shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Even though it's in this sort of visual way, I just copy and paste the text out, and now I've got my completed draft. So you can do it on whiteboards. You can use a sketch pad. Cork boards, if you think like the crime shows. Screenwriters do a lot of work with cork boards and index cards and laying stuff out. And there are a lot of fun digital tools for it as well. If you work with a distributed team, MindMeister is worth checking out. You can sort of build concept maps collaboratively online, and people can sort of dump different ideas in, does revision tracking and that sort of thing. So it's really just, this connects to this, connects to this, and building that little map. So I tend to not advocate brainstorming specifically in terms of writing. And I do mean brainstorming as like the specific group activity. A lot of people say brainstorming and they just mean having ideas. But brainstorming is, 4 to 8 people in a room. There's no bad ideas. You go for a certain amount of minutes. I think it can be useful to generate some ideas initially. But if you're ever in a situation where people are trying to write copy collaboratively, that can be, in my experience, a really inefficient activity. At the end of the day, writing is a solo activity. Somebody has to string word after word together until it's done. So I'm hesitant about brainstorming for writing purposes. So at this point, hopefully at least a few of these have been interesting to you. I'd encourage you to keep exploring. But now we've got some new thinking tools in our box. Any questions on the thinking phase? Any other tools that people use that would maybe fit in that category that I didn't mention? Sure.
I just use Google Doc.
Okay, so you have a Google Doc that you just sort of dump stuff into as ideas and notes come along. Cool. Sure.
I use a website called 750words.com.
Okay.
I believe just changed to 4P, but it's still pretty expensive. But that's the idea. They've got badges, so it's just to kind of keep you writing. It's a lot of that free writing, kind of you just dump your brain, clear it out.
So is it like a gamified kind of thing? Like you're trying to write a certain number of words?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to write 750 words every day, and then you can have streaks, and you can get badges. You can write fast, you can write in the morning, write at night, whatever.
Okay. 750words.com. All right. That's one you guys could check out. So between thinking and composing, this line's a little fuzzier. You might go back and forth a bit. And composing is what most people mean when they say writing. Like most people mean, kind of stringing the prose together, putting my sentences and paragraphs together. So very simply, it's just kind of getting your stuff into a grammatical form. And for the composing process, what I see a lot of people running into is just not being aware of the tools that are out there to help them, and not knowing, like, even the really simple stuff that can make their life so much easier. I was reading this article about a Google study that just completely broke my heart. Like this, it sunk. 9 out of 10 internet search users don't know how to use Control F to search text within a web page. Now, if you're among them, you don't have to raise your hand, but Control F, you hit it, a little bar comes up, and you type in a word, and it finds matches on the page. Right? Seems simple and stupid and obvious to us, sure. But there's a lot of other stuff out there that you might not know that is just, one little trip to the documentation center away from completely changing how you work. So when it comes to writing, I really value tools that help me with speed and flexibility. It's so easy to just start doubting ourselves, to get stuck, to get, just to kind of feel some apathy about an assignment. So anything that helps us move fast, I think is really good. Especially because we don't want to get stuck starting to edit yet. So in addition to Control F, I like to mention key commands categorically. I see a lot of people just holding down arrow keys to move through their document, which also kind of blows my mind. But if you're not aware, there are a lot of simple shortcuts to move a word at a time, a line at a time. Depending on your writing environment, you might even be able to kind of cut and shuffle text, lines or paragraphs at a time. And something I like to do is I keep a little shortcut list just handy on my computer all the time. Anytime I learn something handy, I just write it down, whatever the shortcut was, because I'm not going to remember it the next time, but I'm going to remember that I used it and won't remember what it was. So if you can learn a new key command every week, that's, I think, can really change your approach to writing. So this one I stole from Scott Berkun. I don't know if anyone reads his website. He's an author, has a great book about public speaking, and just also talks about creativity in the writing process a lot. But he uses this technique where he puts a line in his writing environment, whatever editor he's using, and sort of keeps kind of the clean draft, like whatever's starting to come together, above the line. And then the stuff that's not working yet, or the little fragments of ideas, he puts below the line. Now the trick to this is that as you're working on your manuscript or draft, whatever, never delete anything. Don't delete it. Cut it and move it below the line. And so now you're not kicking yourself 30 minutes later when you realize, oh, this was so not a direction I should have gone. Those paragraphs you pulled out, those sentences you pulled out, that killer line for the headline hasn't disappeared. You could do it with versioning. You could maybe try and roll back through something that saves every 3 seconds. I find that a lot more tedious than just having all of my stuff available within one document. Because you're not, again, you're writing, you're still making a thing. So don't worry about polishing it and having it look like it's done before it's done. It's yours. It can be a little messy. Any journalists in the room? No? I was a journalism major, RTV. TK is a fun technique. I actually use the word NARF from Pinky and the Brain. Maybe you watch that. Just because it stands out visually a little more to me. So what you do with the TK is it kind of developed in journalism, because a lot of times you're writing the story, you sort of know what happened, but maybe you don't have the figure, right? You don't know exactly how many gallons of whatever were spilled. You don't know the exact time that something happened. So you could, every time you come to a fact you don't know, stop writing, go to Wikipedia, pick up the phone, go find an answer to that, and oh wait, well now Jim's calling about the project, so I've got to go deal with this, and then all of a sudden you're not writing anymore. So what you could do, the point of this is that you can find it later. So whatever little trick works for you that's not that common, you can then use our Control F technique and crawl through your document later and fill all that stuff in one of the later phases. Just about keeping momentum, really. Clipboard managers. This is one of those things that sometimes people are like, oh my God, I did not know that these existed. It has changed my life. As computers come by default, you can copy one thing and paste one thing to one place. If you get a clipboard manager, you can now configure however many layers of stuff you want to have sitting on your clipboard at any given time. So when I'm doing that copying and pasting and putting stuff above and below the line, I can have, these are the last 10 things now that I've copied on my machine. So when it comes to polishing work or kind of putting in stuff that you're just not sure where it fits, or maybe you need to change something in a few places as you're going through, that can be really useful. I use one called Clip Menu for OS X. There are a few for Windows. My sense is that the Windows ones are not quite as well liked. I think maybe they're just a little buggier, but it's worth looking into. If you're on Linux, I'm sure you can compile one yourself or whatever Linux people do. Text expansion. On the screen, I specifically have an app called Text Expander, but this is really kind of a category of apps. So if you've ever used really like autocorrect on your iPhone, right? You type a thing and it's close to the thing, but it's not quite right, and then bloop, it puts in, hopefully, the right word. A lot of times not. I turn autocorrect off because it drives me crazy. But with text expansion is kind of like autocorrect that you define. You now say, when I type this, put this in. And I'll show you an example here. So I work on Wolfram Alpha, and the official Wolfram Alpha phrasing has a pipe in it, which is a little character above the return key that you have to hold Shift to enter, and it drives me nuts. So I now never type Wolfram Alpha. I type a little shortcut, semicolon, WA, and it goes boop, and it puts in Wolfram Alpha with the right capitalization and everything. Handy too I don't always like to have my email signature on like every message, and I get, like sometimes I forget to delete it out, or I want like a short one for people on my team that just has my phone number. So if I type semicolon psig, now it puts my personal email signature with my website. You can have rich text in there, so that stuff's already linked. And this is like tip of the iceberg. You can do this with forms. So if you answer support emails, or just kind of do repetitive communication that maybe you want to personalize a little bit, you could have the stuff that's always the same, and then some quick fields, dear name. Maybe there's one line open for a custom introduction, the rest of the message, etc. The neat thing about a lot of these text expansion tools is you can have them everywhere. So a lot of the writing environments that I use on iOS have my text snippets in them. So if you think it's handy on a full-size keyboard, when I got that little chiclet keyboard, and I can have like my full email address or other little expanded things pop in automatically, huge time saver. A lot of them use Dropbox to sync, so that's worth considering for your workflow. And actually, I think this is fairly new, but if you are a multi-environment person, you can actually get all of these to work together across Windows and OS X, which I think is pretty neat. So a lot of this kind of text wrangling, getting down to the matrix level and manipulating stuff is a little bit dependent on sort of the foundation of your writing workflow, which for me is plain text. So who writes most of their stuff in a rich text environment, in like Microsoft Word or Pages? There's some people in that kind of workflow. Okay. So, and how many of I quit my presentation. Give me a moment. I'm done, that's it. Why do they have a button for that? That's absurd. I'm gonna hack this thing. So plain text is the opposite of rich text. So if you've got Notepad or TextEdit open on your machine, you just can type things. That's all that you can do, sort of. You don't have a bunch of widgety stuff. You don't have all these little graphics and things. And To me, that's a lot better environment to work in because I'm not writing things for print publication. I'm not putting stuff one page together at a time. If you're working on a term paper or something, great, use Microsoft Word, but really don't because it's awful. Because you can still use plain text. I like to think of it as, oh, now you're gonna be fun with me, as working with a typewriter. You know, people are kind of, you know, there are still people who write on typewriters. If you've seen like pictures of like the ultimate hipster guy who's at a Starbucks with a little typewriter that he brought, and it's like his unicycle is like leaning against the wall. We joke, but man, I totally can see the appeal. I totally can see the appeal because it keeps you locked in, and everything you're doing is with text. And it's not that, you know, it's not so much about focus, though I think it helps with that, but about speed. If there's nothing else I can do, if I'm not moving a mouse around to make stuff happen, you can work a lot faster. So I'm a big advocate of Markdown. Markdown is a very confusingly named markup language for writing HTML copy in a very simple way. And the important parts of Markdown is that it's meant for humans to be able to read. HTML is for computers to read. So if you type hash and then some text, that's now an H1. If you put in 2 hashes, that's an H2, and so on down to H6 and beyond. If you want to put something in bold, you just wrap a couple of asterisks around it. If you've ever had to write a plain text email, it's a lot of the stuff that you might just kind of do naturally to sort of shape and give a little distinction to your text. Links work pretty simply as well. If you want to do a self-referencing link, you can just put put the brackets around it, and it will do that automatically. And the thing about Markdown is it lets you keep your document in a really simple, really flexible way. 30 years from now, I hope that all of your Microsoft Word drafts or just your WordPress posts, if that's the only place that your writing lives, I hope that you can still access and open those. I really do. But by working with plain text files, you know that you're going to be able to. A lot of settings on your computer, a lot of the stuff that makes your computer work is just a plain text document that gets read in a certain way. So it's a very future-friendly way of creating text. Lots and lots of places you can write it. Literally anywhere you can type, you can use Markdown, which is cool. But a lot of apps will also play with it, help render the previews automatically. So that if you like the clean look, if you don't want to see little hashy bits and arrows in your text, you can, like an app like Byword, for example, will just sort of do that for you automatically. So the bold starts to show up, the links show up. So there are some services you can publish directly. If you run a site on Squarespace, you can just write in Markdown for all of your posts. WordPress and Drupal, you can get plugins that allow you to do your authoring of posts in Markdown, which makes stuff really flexible. And as simple as it seems, it's really kind of makes you sort of a document ninja, and you can send your Markdown out to PDF, you can print it, you can put it in rich text, you can just copy and paste it into an email. And I think it's pretty handy. So those are some composing tools. Anything else that people find particularly handy when they're actually getting down to business and doing the writing bit? Sure. I almost had a slide for that, and I didn't because it's not totally open yet. Editorially is a Markdown-based online document kind of collaboration system. You can just share. It's sort of like a really simple, streamlined Google Docs right now that I think is more focused not on getting all of your old stuff into a cloud storage, but actually creating documents online. It's Get Editorially is the website, I believe. Cool. So now we are on our one-way trip into editing land. Very simply, I put editing, revisioning, revising, proofreading, whatever. For me, that's all kind of in the same category. You're probably going to start with more of the structural stuff and trying to really improve your writing. The key to me for editing is it's editing, it's not formatting. We're still not trying to finish. We're just making the writing better. And with editing, the problem I see a lot of people run into is they're reading without really seeing. Okay, quick test. Tell me what's wrong with this document. You don't know, right? Eventually, I start reading through something. If it's just a big chunk of text, a big draft, it just sort of goes blurry on me, right? And I'm just like, it's pretty good. You know, I just wrote this. I'm sure. And I just sort of lose focus on it. And even if you're more attentive than me, still reading it through top to bottom, beginning to end, is you're having the reader's experience, but you're not having like the proofreader's experience. So for editing tools, I really value obliqueness, things that let you look at your text in a different way. At the most simple, I see a lot of teachers at the bar with their term papers to grade and a pencil, and they literally hold it on the paper as they're going through line by line. So now they've got a little focus device for doing the editing. I came across this kind of weird little book a while ago. I don't know how I found it. It's called The 10% Solution. This guy, Ken Rand, who wrote a lot of not particularly popular or famous novels. But I think his methods kind of resonated with me because he's a broadcast guy too. So he kind of got honed in writing 30-second radio spots. If you really need like an intensive boot camp writing experience, try and write 30-second radio commercials for demanding clients, because it's not a lot that fits in there. So at the high level, the 10% solution, you finish your draft, you make it 10% shorter. That's the rule. You cut 10% out. Stephen King gives a lot of writing advice that's similar to this. And then you keep doing that until you can't do it anymore. So how do we cut that 10%? What are we looking for when we do our editing? He has a little mnemonic that I find helpful, the ACBs. We are editing first for accuracy. We have to make sure the thing's actually right. Otherwise, there's not much worth in editing it. We want to make sure it's clear. Do people actually understand what we mean with all this stuff? And then finally, we're focusing on brevity. Sometimes editing means making things longer. Sometimes editing means making things longer for clarity, which gives you a little more flexibility later on. Another really nice technique that I still use, particularly on any of my long-form text, is an editing list. So again, we're back to our Control F. And on the editing list, you create a list of words, maybe trouble words, or just stuff that you run into. And you use each one of these words as a lens for evaluating your document. It's kind of a weird process, so I want you to stick with me. It's not about going, so let's say we're using the word that. And you Control F, and you find the first instance of that. You're not deleting it. You're not saying, oh no, I found a problem. You're just looking at it and saying, okay, what's working and what's not working in this little spot. Look a few words ahead, a few words behind. Maybe for some reason you have the word thatch in your document, and so the hit matches for thatch. Fine, stop there, look around. If you want to edit something, do. If you don't, move on. Even just doing this a few times with a few kind of common phrases can really help you find some unusual little spots to polish up your document. If there's stuff that you actually do find problematic, if you're as pretentious as me and you start a lot of sentences with capital but or capital and, you can do exact case matching. You can go in for word parts as well. Some of these I've now migrated up into my text expansion. So when I type the word literally, it goes boop. In all capital letters, it says quit abusing literally. So then I have to find something else to do. But if you have words like that, you can put it on your editing list as well. Okay, A number 1, if I can do nothing else, if you take no other tool away, please, for the love of God, do this. If someone comes to me and wants a critique on their writing, not just help, like if they really want a critique, like I want this to be good, I will ask them if they've read it aloud. And they say, yeah. And I say, but have you read it out loud? Yeah, no, I read it. Right, but did you sit down and speak the words out loud with your mouth? No. Okay, please go do that now, and then come back to me. And usually they don't come back because either I was jerky about it or they're able to really identify things that didn't stand out when they're skimming with their brain, because we use different processes when we're reading things out loud than when we're going through linearly. Another one I don't have on the slides, but if you're going to have someone else read your document, I really like people who don't speak English as a first language for editors, because they tend to read one word at a time in a very procedural way. So that can be really effective for catching like double instances of words or stuff that our brains tend to skip over. Inversion can be really useful during the editing process. If you kind of did a big effort, if you dumped a lot of words on the page at once. Maybe this is just a weakness in my writing style, but a lot of times when I write my first draft, all the good stuff ends up at the end of sentences and the end of paragraphs and the end of pages as I finally figure out what the heck I was trying to say. So a lot of times if I flip it upside down, last paragraph to the top, last sentence to the top, flip the sentence around, a lot of times the stuff at the end just starts to fall off. So doing a quick inversion, even just testing it on a few paragraphs, I think can be really useful. Doing on time. All right. Some finishing tools. Finishing for me, I like to make a distinction from editing because there's a lot of stuff that we have to do now that involves publishing, that involves getting the document off to other people. With web work, we're doing all of this linking, we're sourcing stuff, maybe we're blogging on our own and we're finding images. So a lot of fussy stuff that can take what seemed like a simple post, and now it's a 6-hour project. When it comes to drafts and documents and bigger stuff, the big mistake that I see people making, don't ask me the name of this presentation, the actual file name. It's really long, and it has like V3 final presentation day copy, I think, in the name. Because I was trying to finish too soon. Like, I'm done. Yay, I'm done. Save it, get it in the right spot, copy it over to my presentation directory. Oh no, I need to change the, okay, so well now this is version 4, final draft copy. Really bad. So it's not that naming thing is so bad, but that's a symptom of a larger problem, which is you're trying to finish too soon. Pay attention to your workflow, look at your editing process, make sure you're really done before you're done. So when it comes to finishing, this is where I encourage a little bit of rigidity, where there should be some checklists and processes. And for a particular type of assignment, whether it's a proposal or an email or a blog post, document the way that you do it. Start with that, and don't change it until you're making a really explicit decision to do so. So for me to get stuff done, my favorite tool is headphones. Not so much for my own sake, but to keep other people away. Right, so not my strength, but one of the really hard parts of writing is soft skills, right? If people aren't writers, they might not understand the process. They might not understand the time it takes to get ramped up into what you're doing. They might not, kind of respect the space. They might not understand that it's not like a one-to-one call and response. How do I say this? Okay, give me 30 minutes to ask you a lot of foundational questions, and then I can give you an answer. Now, protecting your time is just something to be aware of. I'm kind of acknowledging it more than offering a lot of really excellent advice. I'd love to have conversations with people about how they manage this, because I think it can be tough. Hallway testing can be really good. For me, it's kitchen testing, so I work at home with my wife, so I make her look at a lot of things. Sometimes that's all you need. One quick, is this done? Did I miss a thing? Will get you over that hump of not sending it out and finishing. When you get into the finishing level, there's some really, really nerdy and really, really cool stuff out there that I don't even quite have a mastery of yet. There's a guy named Brett Terpstra. That's not a typo. There's 3 T's in a row there. He's the master. He has an awesome podcast called Systematic. I use a lot of his tools. Some of them I buy. Some of them he puts out there for free. The Markdown service tools, a little tough to illustrate, but I'm going to do my best. So let's say, does anyone have to do like a conference report for their team when they come back? We have to write like a little, here's what I learned and all the stuff that I did. So let's say I'm doing a conference report on PSU Web. Let's say I open up all of the stuff I want to link to, all the presentations, all the slides. They're all open in Chrome, right? That's kind of my little landing pad of research. Okay, go to this tab, copy this. Okay, find where I want to link it, go in, paste the link. Instead, what I can do is with these tools, I can say, grab all the links from Chrome and drop them into my document in a markdown format. So now right-click, click, all of those links are now here. Boom. And with the markdown syntax, which I hope you all will learn later, this little bit with PSU and brackets, that's now essentially a tag that I can use as a link throughout my whole document. So anywhere else that I want to link to the conference, I can just drop in a little PSU instead of copying and pasting the link again. Oh yeah, so this, I probably should have gotten this before. With the time, how many minutes do we have left?
We have about 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, so on this one, does anyone have any tips, input, soft skill stuff that they use to kind of protect their time and get writing done? The headphones? Yeah.
Fake headphones, like they're not attached to music.
Somebody in another session I did said they got one of those like on-air recording lights like they have in broadcast studios. And just like kind of put it on top of their cube. So that's basically like a signal. Like if this light is on, I love you, send me an email, but please don't bother me. I need some amount of uninterrupted time to get through. Cool. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, we have a turn-off sign on the door that says you shall not pass, actually. So when we're in the middle of something serious, you just slap the sign up on the door and shut it, and then people have to see their respect it.
All right. Sure.
We work in a totally open setting, and so basically I work at home.
I hear that from a lot of people. Like, you know, the I really need to get some work done day is also the work from home day. Yeah. So, sure.
I write early in the morning, because I know that's when my brain is the most active and ready to do it. For some people, it's late at night. If you have a situation in your work where they recognize
I so
8 to 5 just doesn't cut it.
I so want to do that. Like if I have to get up really early for a dentist appointment, like those are actually my most productive days despite the interruption. But I got to start getting up earlier. Yes?
I know one freelancer mother who puts a sign on her home office door that says, unless you are bleeding or on fire, do not enter.
Okay, I'm just going to have to start making a collection of these signs that people have to get their writing time. I think this could be a good Tumblr. So, cool. So some finishing tools. Hopefully you've added to your box as well. Some final thoughts. There's a fantastic, fantastic video out there from John Cleese of Monty Python fame, where he just like lays it down on creativity. This is one of the more salient quotes for me, that creativity is not a talent. It's not something you're born with. It's a way of operating. It's a workflow. It's a process. It's something that you practice and can get good at. So be aware of your workflow. If something's not working, if you're struggling with a document, the only thing that's wrong with you is a lack of awareness. You're not necessarily a bad writer. So look for that check engine light. Throw away bad tools. A lot of people satisfice with whatever they've been given. You know, they hate writing in this CMS, or oh my gosh, Word keeps crashing on me. Well, throw it away. Don't work on it. If you have a hammer and the head keeps flying off in your workshop, you're not going to use that hammer anymore. So if something's not working for you, see what you can do instead. Some advice that I really need to work on following: plan your experiments. If you've got some lovely new tool that you can't wait to rush home and try, I would encourage you to not drop it into a current project necessarily, unless it's a real little thing. But if you're going to really try and work on disrupting your workflow, maybe take a different tack on a project, sort of plan that in advance. If you can't remember anything and you're panicking, just use index cards, which could be kind of the summary of this talk, because they will pretty much solve anything. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any time for questions?
About 2 minutes.
Okay. Questions? Discussion, other tools? Sure.
So why not sticky? Why index cards versus sticky?
Well, I like index cards because you can shuffle them. Like it's a lot easier. Like I guess I prefer piles, because now I can kind of get like, so let's say there's like, I don't know, the introductory paragraph or like the main idea, whatever it is. Now I've got a stack for that, and I'm only seeing the top of the stack. So it's sort of like a light box. You know, if you go into Lightbox view on Keynote, you're sort of seeing everything laid out. If you start to nest stuff, you can open and collapse it. So for me, index cards work a little bit better on that level. Sticky notes to me can just get a little noisy too. But stuff I would recommend sticky notes for, that editing list, if you're going to use that one, stick it on your monitor. Just have it there all the time. So even if you've just got, the nice thing about editing is sometimes it doesn't actually take a lot of brain power. So if you're sitting waiting for a conference call to start and you've got 5 minutes, you could start Control-Fing through your draft for gerunds, look for ing and just kind of polish up some copy, just like your sand and wood. So, sure.
You talked about reading it aloud. What do you think of using the computer to read it to?
I do that sometimes. Yeah, so at least on OS 10, in nearly any environment, you can just go up into the file menu, one of the menus up there, and just like speech to text, it'll just start reading it. So yeah, I do that a lot. It's nice too if you're in like an office environment because that can go into your headphones. So cool. All right, if anyone else wants to chat, I'll be around the rest of the day. So thank you very much.